The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
This is Ken Curra, Market Development Agronomist for Pride Seeds. I cover South Central Ontario, starting in the Godrich Bayfield area against Lake Huron, swinging down through London, St. Thomas, Stratford area, and east to the Niagara Peninsula. So I cover a pretty wide swath of Ontario and an area that's quite variable this year in terms of corn and soybean production. Talk about the corn harvest to date. It's been interesting, to say the least. It's highly variable. I cover areas that are everything from heavy clay to some really coarse gravel and sandy areas. And I'll start with a recap of those areas that are the worst. And now that we're about hard to estimate, but 30 to 50% of the way through corn harvest, depending on the area. So far, the yield reports are coming in, and some are quite poor and some are really amazing. On the poor end of the scale, the gravels and coarse sands that miss 7 to 9 weeks of rain in the summer through most of June and July, tough going there. The rains came way too late to help those crops out. And we're actually hearing in some small isolated fields, 5, 10, 15 acre fields, of some sub 50 bushel averages for those crops. So that's been a really tough go, and just simply no rain. So really unfortunate circumstance there. As you move into some of the average producing ground, some of maybe the tougher clays or some of the sands that are in a little bit better shape than gravel sand areas, those crops have been actually surprisingly good. And I think one of the keys, if you look at the ears in a lot of those places, is number one, good pollination, for the most part right to the tip. So the weather around pollination was not too hot, where limited population and silk availability, pollen availability. So overall we have good population. I think one of the other keys this year to those surprisingly good yields is actually pretty good kernel depth. My fear was in late August that our kernel depth would be quite shallow, and of course that costs us some yield. But you can see on this here, we got nice kernel size, nice kernel depth there. And if we shell that off, pretty nice sample of corn, nice size there. So again, that's where some of that surprising top end yield is coming from in the medium yield areas of my zone. There are some fantastic yields out there, particularly the areas that caught rain the last week of June, first week of July. Those areas were quite small, but the yields coming out of those regions are just astronomical. We have to remember it was a very early start in Ontario back in the spring. Most of the corn was in April. Some started the first week of April. Many started around the 15th, 18th in there. And usually that's a 2 to 3 week head start for most guys. So nice long growing season. A lot of producers traded up to maximize their heat unit selection on the hybrids they were growing. So that was a yield opportunity. A lot of producers increased populations by 1 or 2,000 per acre. That was an opportunity to increase yield that looks like it's paid back to some degree in those areas. And additional fertilizer, particularly nitrogen. Many producers were quite aggressive with their nitrogen rates in that situation, knowing it would be a nice long season and the real opportunity to reach for some top yields with good commodity prices on the horizon at the time. And it's all paid off in those areas. What's really key this year and reflected in our 300 bushel initiative, as well as testimonials from our growers and dealers within the Pride Seeds team, is the top end response to corn in ideal situations. Our corn genetics nowadays really respond to inputs. They respond to good management, and it's not just about the actual inputs, but our growers are really good at growing corn. You have to say that the land work equipment we have, the cultivating equipment, the planters are fantastic, and our growers know how to use all those tools, develop a fantastic stand of corn in the spring, and it's paying off in spades this fall in most areas of my zone. So overall, pretty nice. The high stress in the summer has led to some harvest issues. You can see this crop behind me. This is a crop that caught one of those rains just north of Woodstock, and a very isolated rain shower, not much of one, but it clearly helped it out to a great degree. It's a pretty nice even crop of corn here, and helped it along quite nicely. But there is a lot of stress that this crop went through for the better part of a month and a half to 2 months. It was under drought stress every single day for the better part of 3 to 7 weeks in some areas. One of the issues has been, if I can show the shank of this ear here, the issue has been smaller diameter and brittle shanks. And we noticed actually in mid-September already brittle shanks on some ears that were still on an entirely green plant. And definitely not a good sign. That's a response to the high stress and the drought. Those shanks get brittle, and we have some hybrids in some high stress areas that are dropping cobs. That's generally a field response, and there is some hybrid sensitivity to that, but for the most part it's a field response to that stress. So harvest has really needed to get moving quickly. We're starting to see now, over the last week we went through some fairly high winds 3 or 4 days in this area. South and east winds and some rain that came along with it, and our stalks are starting to get a little punky. Things are a little bit quick to go over now, and we're seeing some damage in a few fields. So it is time to expedite harvest. Even though it's October the 25th, your corn crop is behaving like it's November 25th in this part of the province. So it's time to get at her. Hopefully the weather cooperates, although in the near term it doesn't look that great. Hopefully we can get some cooperative weather and we can get at this, and by November 15th, it'll be wash-up time, if not a little bit earlier for most of us. So, this has been Ken Curra, Market Development Agronomist for Pride Seeds.